Take a moment to look in your wallet. There, on the $10 bill, sits a face that watches over the American economy. For generations, he was simply a statesman in a powdered wig, a dusty figure from the history books. But today, Alexander Hamilton has been resurrected. He is recognized not just as the first Secretary of the Treasury, but as the true architect of the American financial system. He has been immortalized anew in the hit musical Hamilton, which reminded the world of his brilliance and his tragedy. But beyond the Broadway stage lies a darker, more complex reality. How did an immigrant orphan build a superpower? Today, we explore the life of the $10 founding father. To understand the man, we must understand where he began. It was not in the halls of power, but on the small volcanic island of Nevis in the mid-1750s. Hamilton's story begins in shadow. He was born out of wedlock, a status that carried a heavy social stigma and guaranteed a life of hardship in the rigid colonial hierarchy. His childhood was a sequence of abandonments. His father left the family, and by the age of 12, his mother had died, leaving him effectively orphaned. Yet, even as a child, he refused to sink. He found work as a shipping clerk. Imagine a 12-year-old boy managing complex international trade operations, tracking currencies and cargo in a bustling port. In these humid docks, he demonstrated a remarkable intelligence and ambition that far outstripped his limited opportunities. Destiny often arrives in the form of disaster. In 1772, a catastrophic hurricane slammed into the Caribbean, flattening villages and destroying livelihoods. In the aftermath, the young clerk picked up a pen. Hamilton penned a vivid, dramatic account of the storm's destruction. It was a piece of writing so powerful, so visceral, that it caught the attention of the local elite. The community recognized that this was no ordinary clerk. They saw his exceptional writing talent and raw intellect. They decided this mind was too valuable to waste on a small island. A fund was raised by local leaders to send this brilliant young man to America for an education. The hurricane had destroyed his home, but it had launched his life. Hamilton arrived in New York, a city on the verge of exploding. He enrolled at King's College, which we now know as Columbia University, but the classroom couldn't contain him. The colonies were boiling with talk of independence, and Hamilton threw himself into the fray. He didn't just study history, he sought to shape it. He wrote passionate pamphlets supporting the patriot cause, arguing fiercely against British rule. Words were not enough. He craved action. He joined the Hearts of Oak militia, taking up arms for independence. In one early display of his daring, he helped steal British cannons while under direct fire to arm the revolutionary forces. The writer had become a warrior. Talent like Hamilton's rises to the top. By 1777, he was invited to join the most exclusive circle in the war, General George Washington's elite staff. He served as a lieutenant colonel, but he was far more than a soldier. He became Washington's indispensable aide-de-camp. History would come to know him as the general's brain. Hamilton managed the war from a desk. He wrote critical letters, managed orders, and much more, and handled the strategic correspondence that kept the ragged army together. Yet, this was a source of torment. Hamilton was frustrated by desk work. He didn't want to just write about the war. He desperately craved field command and the combat glory that came with it. Finally, the opportunity arrived. At the siege of Yorktown, Washington finally granted Hamilton his long-desired field command. The mission was suicidal: capture the heavily fortified British redoubt No. 10. Hamilton didn't hesitate. He led a bold night attack. To ensure the element of surprise, he ordered his men to unload their guns. They would take the fort with bayonets alone. The gamble paid off. The stunning success of the attack forced the British surrender. It was the blow that ended the Revolutionary War. Hamilton had his glory. The war was won, but the peace was being lost. The new nation was governed by the Articles of Confederation, which created a paralyzed, powerless central government. It was a disaster. Congress lacked the authority to tax citizens or regulate commerce between the states. The states operated like separate countries, squabbling over borders and trade, undermining any sense of national unity. The economy collapsed. Currency was worthless. Watching this chaos, Hamilton demanded a change. He realized that without a stronger government, the revolution would have been in vain. In 1787, the founders gathered to fix the broken system. Hamilton, a delegate from New York, arrived with a radical vision. He took the floor and delivered a marathon 6-hour speech. He proposed a government that shocked the room, a president for life, modeled closely on the British monarchy. The other delegates were horrified. They rejected his plan, fearing it was dangerously close to the kingship they had just overthrown. Yet Hamilton was a pragmatist. Despite his reservations about the final document, he championed the Constitution's ratification, knowing it was the only path forward. To convince the skeptical state of New York to ratify this new Constitution, Hamilton launched a public relations blitz. He teamed up with James Madison and John Jay to write a series of essays under the pseudonym Publius. They planned a modest number of essays. They ended up writing 85. This collection became known as the Federalist Papers. Hamilton's output was superhuman. He personally authored the majority of these influential constitutional arguments, 51 of the 85 essays. His prolific writing helped secure the ratification of the new Constitution, defining how the American government operates to this day. In 1789, President Washington appointed his old aide, Hamilton, to be the first Treasury Secretary. It was not a glamorous job. Hamilton faced an enormous challenge. The fledgling United States was effectively bankrupt. But Hamilton saw beyond the debt. He envisioned an industrial, commercial superpower modeled on Britain. This put him on a collision course with Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. They opposed him, preferring an agrarian nation of farmers, untouched by the corruption of big cities and finance. The battle lines for America's soul were drawn. The immediate crisis was debt. Individual states were crushed by war debts, threatening national stability. Hamilton proposed a bold, controversial plan, assumption. He wanted the federal government to take over, to assume all state debts. Why? It wasn't just about money. It was about power. By creating a unified obligation, he would force the states to look to the federal government. This strategy was designed to build national credit and bind the states into a cohesive union. If they all owed money to the same place, they were all invested in its survival. Gridlock ensued. James Madison blocked Hamilton's debt assumption plan in Congress. Meanwhile, Hamilton blocked the southern states' demands to house the nation's capital. The stalemate was broken at a dinner table. In a historic 1790 meeting at Thomas Jefferson's residence, a compromise was brokered. The deal was struck. Hamilton secured his debt plan, saving the economy. In exchange, the South won the capital. The seat of power would move to the banks of the Potomac, to a new city called Washington, D.C. Hamilton wasn't done. He proposed a revolutionary banking proposal, a central bank to hold federal funds and issue currency. Jefferson screamed foul. The Constitution was silent on the government's power to create banking institutions. If it wasn't written down, Jefferson argued, the government couldn't do it. Hamilton countered with the concept of implied powers. He argued that the Constitution's elastic clause gave the government the tools it needed to function. Washington agreed. He signed the legislation establishing the first bank of the United States. Hamilton looked at the fields of America and saw factories. In his famous report on manufactures, he championed factories over an agrarian economy. He proposed protective tariffs on imports to nurture young American industry. He didn't just want a free market, he wanted government support. He recommended subsidies for emerging industries to spark manufacturing innovation. This was too much for the time. Congress rejected most of these proposals, viewing them as too radical for the era. Hamilton was decades ahead of his countrymen. The unity of the Revolution had shattered. Two distinct political parties emerged, centered around these two giants. On one side were the Federalists, led by Hamilton. They favored a strong central government, pro-business policies, and pro-British trade relations. They represented urban commercial interests and believed in a loose constitutional interpretation. On the other side were the Democratic Republicans, led by Jefferson. They emphasized states' rights, pro-farmer policies, and sympathized with the French Revolution. They wanted a decentralized power structure and strict limits on the federal government. Tensions boiled over in the backwoods of Pennsylvania. Farmers violently refused to pay Hamilton's excise tax on whiskey. This was the first true test of the new authority. The rebellion threatened the legitimacy of the federal government. Hamilton didn't blink. He advised Washington to deploy a massive militia army to suppress the uprising. In a show of force, Hamilton personally rode with the troops. It was a clear message demonstrating the government's power. The laws of the United States would be enforced. But Hamilton's greatest enemy was often himself. In the mid-1790s, he was accused of financial corruption and misuse of treasury funds. To clear his name of theft, he had to reveal a shameful truth. He admitted he wasn't stealing money. He was paying blackmail to cover up an affair with a woman named Maria Reynolds. In a desperate defense, he published the Reynolds pamphlet. It detailed the extramarital affair publicly to prove his financial innocence. He was cleared of theft charges, but his moral reputation was utterly destroyed. By 1800, Hamilton was out of office, but he still held the keys to power. The presidential election resulted in a tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Hamilton despised both men. Jefferson was his ideological nemesis. Burr was a man he viewed as having no principles at all. He faced a crucial decision. Hamilton made a decisive endorsement. He threw his weight behind Jefferson, famously stating, "Jefferson has beliefs, Burr has none." Jefferson became president. Aaron Burr became vice president, harboring a deep, festering resentment toward Hamilton. The resentment simmered for years, fueled by bitter insults and political attacks. Finally, it boiled over. Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel over perceived dishonor and slights. On July 11, 1804, they met at dawn at Weehawken, New Jersey, across the Hudson from New York. The moment of truth. Hamilton fired deliberately into the air, throwing away his shot. Burr did not. He shot to kill, mortally wounding the founding father. Hamilton died, but his vision survived. He left behind an enduring legacy as an economic architect. He created the foundation of the U.S. economy, the credit system, the central bank, and a stable currency. His financial innovations transformed America from a farming backwater into an economic powerhouse. He also established the loose interpretation of the Constitution, expanding the powers of the federal government to meet new challenges. We live in a world of banks, stock markets, and industrial power. In short, we live in Hamilton's America, shaped forever by his visionary policies.